We've still got some people coming in, but I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Steve Weaver. I'm the owner of Weaver's Dive and Travel Center and Dreamweaver Travel, located here in Boulder, Colorado. And we're very excited about the presentation tonight and very excited to have so many people that have joined us from all over the world. We've got people on this call from Australia, from the UK, from New Zealand. I see some of my buddies from Indonesia here, Danny and Tarkan.
Hi. Hello.
And Brigitte. We're going to have a really great presentation tonight. Peter's with us right now, but before we get started, I wanted to give you a little bit of information. I'm sure most of you have done a billion Zoom calls by now, as we all have in these unprecedented times. But just as a reminder for those of you that aren't real familiar with it, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a little chat button. If you want to ask any questions during the presentation or after, you can click on that chat button and it will send a message to Kelly. Say hi, Kelly.
Hi, everybody.
Who's co-hosting with me. And we will relay those messages on to Peter as the time calls for it. You'll also see at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, there's a video button. You can use that to turn your video on and off. We love to see your happy faces, so turning it on is great. We've muted everyone just so that we don't have any interruptions to Peter's presentation. If someone really wants to ask a question in person, we can unmute you. So you can send that to us in the chat as well. On the upper right-hand corner, you'll see there's a little icon that's, that has a view option. So you can set that to be a number of different ways. You can see all the screens at once. You can have just the speaker's screen enlarged. However you want to set up your screen, you can do that on the upper right-hand corner. So I think that covers most of it, doesn't it, Kelly?
I think so. Thank you.
So again, my name is Steve Weaver. I'm located here in Boulder, Colorado. We are a dive store. We're also a dive travel company. Been in business here for 37 years, doing dive trips all over the world. And we also have a full service dive store. We sell equipment, do training and service equipment, do group trips every month somewhere exotic around the world. We're also very involved in ocean awareness programs, ocean protection programs. We obviously make our living in the ocean, so it's very important to us to make sure that that we're doing whatever we can to help keep our oceans healthy and educate our customers as to what they can do to keep the oceans healthy. And in part of that mission, we have partnered closely with organizations like Sea Shepherd. We've worked with them for many, many years now. Peter was actually out here about 7 years ago as a guest speaker at my store. Had a great turnout, a great time with Peter here. And we had Paul Watson here 2 weeks ago doing a presentation. He's also been out to my store a couple times. So you're behind, Peter. He was here twice. You've only been here once. So when things loosen up, we'll expect to see you back here. But that's a little bit about me and my business. We're going to start out by showing you a little video before I introduce Peter and let him do his talk this evening. Prior to COVID, the COVID pandemic, Peter was working in Gambia with the military there on a campaign that was addressed at illegal fishing practices in the area. And we have a short little video that Kelly's going to cue up here in a minute, and we want to show you that before we get started. Are you ready, Kelly?
Currently on patrol off the coast of the Gambia, fisheries and the Gambia Navy to address the issue of illegal fishing off the coast of Gambia. Waters here off West Africa have traditionally been some of the most abundant waters in the world, and yet the rigorous fish populations Asia is other fishes that are there, or fish vessels all over the world have populated West Africa. And that's resulted in these waters now being some of the most overfished in the world, with fish populations falling by as much as 40% quite recently. There's a 9 nautical mile limit off the coast of the Gambia, which is a special protected area reserved for artisanal fishermen. But these fishermen are complaining to the Ministry of Fisheries every single day about incursions by industrial trawlers coming into those waters and just extracting tremendous amounts of fish. The presence of the Sam Simon here allows the Gambia to have eyes on the water, to see what these operators are doing, but not only to monitor what they're doing, but to also allow them to arrest vessels that are violating the law.
Trawler.
Yes, go to Bullbox. Go to the Bullbox.
Viking, please proceed straight to the Thunder now.
The campaign has kicked off with a big success. We know through various technological tools, but also testimony from the fishers on board these ships, that these vessels routinely come into the coast so close that they can literally see the buildings and trees along the coastline. Having 2 arrests early on into our campaign here in the Gambia shows that 1, there is a serious problem, but 2, the results are easily generated by a patrolling presence and by a partnership between civil society and government. That's why Sea Shepherd has to be in these areas, to prevent these fisheries waters from being completely destroyed, to defend the rights of local people here, and to stop these poachers from plundering our oceans.
Yeah, one of the things we were afraid of, guys, is that streaming videos through Zoom can be a little laggy sometimes. So apologize for that, but I think you get the gist of the idea. Before I go on to introduce our guest speaker this evening, I just want to remind everyone that Sea Shepherd works primarily on donations, probably exclusively on donations, actually. And if you are so inclined, you can go to seashepherd.org and donate, and it would be greatly appreciated. I'm sure anything in the neighborhood of $1 million might even get a boat named after you, so keep that in mind, but anything would help, and I encourage you all to do that at your leisure when you get a chance, and every time you get a chance, go to seashepherd.org and donate if you can. So a little bit about our guest speaker, Peter Hammarstedt. Peter joined Sea Shepherd when he was old enough to submit an application, which I believe was about 18 at the time. He started as a volunteer on the boat and is now Director of Campaigns for Sea Shepherd Global. He also serves on the board of Sea Shepherd Global, Sea Shepherd Netherlands, and Sea Shepherd Legal. And he's the chairman of Sea Shepherd Australia. He heads Sea Shepherd Illegal, Unreported, and Unregulated Fishing Task Force in Africa. And I believe is also still the captain of the Bob Barker, if I'm not mistaken. So we're very excited and delighted and thankful to have Peter with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Peter Hammarstedt.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces here, from Colorado to Connecticut to Australia. I wish I could be in Colorado personally to do this talk, but I think this gives us the opportunity to reach out to even more people globally. So thanks for taking some time out of your Saturday or Sunday, if you're on the other side of the world, to be here with us tonight. I first joined Sea Shepherd when I was 18 years old, and that was 17 years ago. And ever since I was 14 years old, no environmental issue was of greater importance to me than the issue of whaling. And that was a deeply felt sentiment that I had from 14 years old when I first saw a picture of a dead minke whale being pulled up the slipway of an 8,000-ton ship down in the Antarctic. And that feeling was then amplified when I actually went down to the Antarctic on Sea Shepherd ships and saw the killing for myself. But as I spent 10 years with Sea Shepherd chasing Japanese whaling ships around the frozen continent of the Antarctic, the remaining 7 seas were under siege. Shark populations were plummeting, fish populations were falling, and all 7 species of sea turtles continued to be pushed further towards the brink of extinction. As the Japanese whaling fleet ruthlessly pursued 1,035 whales annually, over 300,000 whales and dolphins were being killed every single year as bycatch in the industrial fishing sector. The marine scientist and University of York professor, Calum Roberts, he describes whaling as the first global fishing industry. And if you look back 200 years ago, whalers from the Netherlands, from the Basque Country, from the Americas, systematically moved from ocean to ocean, driving whale species to the brink of extinction. They went all the way down up to the Arctic, and with the advent of diesel and steam technologies, with the invention of the explosive whaling harpoon gun, they went all the way down to the ends of the earth, down to the Southern Ocean. And so effective were they that in 1986, the international community got together and put in place a global moratorium on commercial whaling. Blue whales fell down to 0.5% of what their pre-whaling number was. These measures have been largely really effective, and we've seen that whale populations around the world are rebounding because of this international action. But the same cannot be said for populations of sharks, the same cannot be said for fish, and the same cannot be said for sea turtles and other creatures in the sea. We've largely won the war to save the whales, but as a conservation movement, we've been losing almost everywhere else. Elizabeth Colbert, who is a staff writer for The New Yorker, she writes often about what she calls the 6th extinction, the 6th in a line of 5 massive species die-outs throughout ecological history, but the first that's been caused by us. Shark species that survived the KT asteroid that killed the dinosaurs may not actually survive us. If current trends continue, then by 2048, the world's major fisheries targeting predatory fish populations will collapse. And at the same time, the amount of plastic in the world's oceans will actually outweigh the amount of fish. Gone will be the bluefin tuna. Gone will be every species of sea turtle. Gone will be the vaquita porpoise, the world's most endangered cetacean, of which there's less than 20 left. 2048 is less than 30 years away, and yet Sea Shepherd's been around for more than 40 years. It means that we have less time to turn this tide of destruction than Sea Shepherd's been around to date. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization believe that 90% of the world's fisheries are either fully exploited or overexploited. And for me, numbers and statistics are really hard to set to memory, but the number 90 comes up time and time again. The number of large fish in the world's oceans has fallen by 90% in the past 100 years. 90% of the world's fisheries are either overexploited or fully exploited. And 20% of the world's fish that are caught through illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing methods. So we recognize here is this issue. We have to deal with overfishing to protect the health of our oceans. When 1 out of 5 of those operators are operating illegally, then surely these are operators we should be able to knock out because we already have the law on our side. 90% of the world's fish are also caught in the waters of a country. There actually is a government there that has the authority to board, inspect, and arrest ships. They actually have a jurisdiction to do something about the illegal fishing problem. So if we consider that 90% of the world's fisheries are overexploited or fully exploited, 90% of the world's fish are caught in the waters of countries, then to turn back this tide of destruction, we have to work with governments to bring these illegal operators to justice. And that's a revelation that came to me about 6 years ago, when, thanks to government action by Australia and New Zealand, the International Court of Justice in The Hague, the highest court in the world, ruled that the Japanese whaling effort down in the Antarctic was illegal. And so the Japanese government took a hiatus from whaling down in the Southern Ocean. And that gave Sea Shepherd an opportunity to focus on another poaching problem that was happening at the bottom of the world, namely the poaching of Patagonian and Antarctic toothfish. 6 years ago, there were 6 vessels that we called the Bandit 6 that were fishing for toothfish illegally. They were able to avoid justice for over 10 years because they would change their name and their flag frequently. They had what we called their nameplates on the stern, on the back of their vessel, were what we call James Bond license plates. They would go into port with one name, and as soon as they would leave port, they would be operating under a different name. When Australian Customs and Border Protection would fly over one of these vessels fishing illegally, documenting their activity, as soon as that Australian Customs plane was over the horizon, the ship was already operating under a different name. The strategy that Sea Shepherd came up with was actually really simple. It was something that had never been tried before. We had 2 ships, the Bob Barker, which I was under the command of, and the Sam Simon, commanded by Captain Siddharth Chakravarti, and we came up with a really simple strategy. The idea was that the Sam Simon would confiscate any illegal fishing gear that we came across, and the Bob Barker, my vessel, would follow one of these poachers for however long it took until someone somewhere arrested that ship. It took about 2 weeks to get from Australia and New Zealand, respectively, down to the Southern Ocean. And after just 2 days of searching through the iceberg-laden fields of the Southern Ocean, out of the fog appeared the most notorious poacher in the world, wanted by Interpol on an international blacklist for many, many years, a ship called the Thunder. We placed this vessel under what was essentially a citizen's arrest and ordered them back to Australia to hand themselves over to the police, and not surprisingly, they refused that instruction. And thus started what would become, unbeknownst to us, the longest maritime pursuit in history. They abandoned their net, and so for 3 weeks, the Sam Simon worked hard to pull all 72 kilometers of their illegal gill net out of their sea, freeing any animals that were caught, while the Bob Barker hugged close by to the Thunder. And the idea was that as long as we followed this ship, they couldn't change their name, they couldn't change their flag, they couldn't repaint. We were going to be this loud hailer barking at their heels, saying, this is where this vessel is, right here, right now, providing real-time information to law enforcement, including Interpol, saying, somebody arrest this ship. And we were going to be this spotlight lighting up their criminal enterprise to the world so that they absolutely could not hide. The first thing that the Thunder captain tried to do was to lose us in the heavy ice floes that surround the Antarctic. But we were able to follow in the warm line that the wake of the ship drew through the ice. And after 24 hours in the ice fields, we broke through to open water. The captain of the Thunder then tried to lose us in the heavy weather that the Southern Ocean is known for. So they set course for the worst storm system in the Antarctic, and 7 to 8 to then 9 meter seas beat and battered the Bob Barker as we followed them north out of the Antarctic. After about 2-3 weeks of pursuit, 500 nautical miles southeast of South Africa, the Thunder decided their next strategy was to simply try to wait us out and test our patience and to test our resolve. They shut their engine down and started adrift. And that was definitely the most difficult part of this chase, was just that uncertainty of not knowing when they would start again, knowing that this was a criminal operator that had made an illicit profit of over $60 million in their 10 years of poaching. A vessel that was connected to criminal operators in Galicia, the Galician mafia that was funding it, and really not knowing how this chase would end. Every single day at noon, my chief engineer would bring me my fuel figures for the day. And with just our generator running, we were consuming about 500 liters of fuel a day. And looking at the fuel remaining on board, we had 400,000 liters of fuel remaining. And so that was pretty simple math to do. It was that if the Thunder drifted indefinitely, then we could be out at sea with them for over 2 years. I knew I needed to get my crew on board with the idea of staying out at sea indefinitely. So I went down to speak to my chief cook at the time, Priya from Byron Bay in Australia. And I asked her if we had enough food to stay out at sea for 2 years, to which she replied, "We have enough rice and we have enough beans to survive at sea for 2 years." I gathered my crew together, and the Sam Simon, having just pulled up 72 kilometers of this gill net, was on their way to the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean to turn over this net as evidence to the International Criminal Police Organization. So they were going to be passing through our drift zone. So I told my crew that they had 24 hours to think about it. There was an opportunity for them to disembark and get onto the Sam Simon. But if they were willing to stay, then they would have to commit to potentially 2 years. I told them that there was no guarantee as to how this chase would end. It could be that after 2 years, we sail into port somewhere and the government there refuses to act against the ship. It could be that we end up being arrested for some twisted reason and the Thunder goes free. But as long as we were with this vessel, then we would be able to prevent them from illegally fishing. Every day that we could stay with this ship would be thousands, if not tens of thousands of lives saved. I gave the crew 24 hours to think about it and just hoped and hoped and hoped that my chief engineer would be one of the people to stay. And out of 30 crew, 26 of my crew stayed on board and only 4 went on to the Sam Simon to go back to Mauritius. And that's the kind of passion and commitment that I don't think you can find anywhere else but in an organization like Sea Shepherd. After 50 days of this chase, the Thunder decided to start motoring again. We chased them around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. We chased them up past the coast of Namibia, Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and here you're getting a bit of geography lesson of Africa. And finally, after 110 days, crossing 3 oceans and 11,000 nautical miles, unable to shake our pursuit, the captain of the Thunder decided to sink his own ship in an ill-fated bid to destroy the evidence on board. Early in the morning of the 110th day, the captain of the Thunder and all 40 of his crew abandoned the ship in life rafts. But as they abandoned the sinking ship, 3 of my crew went on board, seizing computer hard drives, mobile phones, nautical charts, even a toothfish down in their cargo hold, evidence that we would later turn over to Interpol. And after the Sam Simon rescued all 40 of their crew, and together we turned the crew over to the authorities in the small island state of Sao Tome and Principe, the captain and 2 of his officers were sentenced to 3 years imprisonment, and they were fined 15 million euros. What was unbelievable is here was a ship that no government could stop in over 10 years, and yet a small group of passionate and compassionate people, supported by tens of thousands of people around the world, people like you, were able to do what no government could do, namely shutting down the Thunder. And what was really inspirational about the campaign was that it didn't stop just there. As we were chasing the Thunder, media was reporting about it around the world. It was the front page of the New York Times above the fold, and people started asking of their governments, why did it fall upon a non-governmental organization to do the job of the world's navies? And so in less than 1 year after the Thunder sank, we saw another 2 of the Bandit 6 arrested in Cabo Verde, another 1 arrested in Senegal, 1 arrested in Malaysia, 1 was intercepted and then later sunk by the Indonesian Navy. And in just 1 year, we were able to shut down the Banded Six and shut down illegal fishing in the Southern Ocean. This was really a transitional campaign for Sea Shepherd, because as we were chasing the thunder up the coast of West Africa, I was in touch with a number of governments asking if they could somehow come out to sea and intervene and arrest the ship. And there was one country in Central West Africa, the country of Gabon, that said that if the thunder entered their waters, then they would apprehend the boat. When we were rescuing the Thunder crew, we were 80 miles off the island state of Sao Tome and Principe, and I remember standing on the bridge as the ship was sinking and thinking, why, out of all the places in the world, did the Thunder captain decided to sink his ship in the Gulf of Guinea? He could have sank his ship anywhere. And when we handed over him and his crew to the Sao Tomean Coast Guard, and they came out in their one single coastal patrol boat that had a range of 20 nautical miles, a quarter of the distance to where the Thunder sank, I knew why he chose that spot. The captain of the Thunder knew that no Navy was going to come on board with submersible pumps and keep that ship afloat. He knew that his ship would sink and the evidence on board with it. And for the same reason that the Thunder captain decided to sink his ship in the Gulf of Guinea, that's the same reason why this area is a hotspot of illegal fishing, transshipment, drug trafficking, human trafficking, piracy, namely that this is an area of the world where there's inadequate monitoring, control, and surveillance. Well, after the Thunder sank, I was invited to go to Gabon, where I met with the Minister of Defense and with the Minister of Fisheries, and we signed an agreement whereby we would provide a ship as a civilian offshore patrol vessel, we would provide a crew to run that vessel, and we would provide fuel for that ship, and Gabon would provide law enforcement agents from the National Parks Authority, from the Gabonese Navy, and from the Fisheries Department. Law enforcement agents with the authority to board, inspect, and arrest ships. And patrolling with Gabon now for the past 4 years, we've assisted Gabon to arrest 12 vessels for illegal fishing. Every single one of those vessels, every day that they're detained, we're saving thousands of sea creatures. Every day that they're stuck in port is an illegal slaughterhouse shut down. And just after we started working with Gabon, thanks to the work of Pristine Seas and the National Geographic Society, Gabon established the largest network of marine protected areas in Africa, covering 26% of their waters. And we're now working with the Gabonese government to establish Africa's first shark sanctuary. And it started with doing these joint at-sea patrols. With the success of the work in Gabon, we were invited to start working with other countries in West Africa. The next place we went was in Liberia. 2 years ago, we were on patrol off the coast of Liberia when we came across a ship called the Lobiko II, a vessel that was legally licensed to fish in the waters of Liberia for tuna using long line fishing gear. The Liberian Coast Guard, who were working on board the Sea Shepherd ship Sam Simon, boarded the Lobiko II. And what they found was just shocking to the core. They discovered that the Lobiko II was, under its previous name, Maine, was wanted by 3 international regional fisheries management organizations. This was a blacklisted vessel. They saw that the ship was not using long lines. They were using deep sea gill nets to target deep sea sharks. And they also discovered on board a secret shark liver oil production plant. From what we discovered looking back at the history of the vessel is that in the 1990s, this ship, the Lobiko II, was part of a fleet of 50 largely Spanish-owned vessels that were targeting deep sea sharks in the North Atlantic. In any single night, any single evening, they would be putting out between 6,000 to 9,000 kilometers of gill net, which is the distance between London, New York, and back. Any single night, that's the amount of net that was out in the oceans by these 50 ships. On every fishing expedition that would last between 4 to 8 weeks, each ship would lose 30 kilometers of gill net as ghost net that would continue to drift and kill until it would finally wash ashore somewhere. 30 kilometers of gill net times 50 ships is 1,500 kilometers of gill net. Almost 1,000 miles of gill net lost at sea every 4 to 8 weeks by these 2 ships. And that's the equivalent of 750 tons of marine plastic pollution in the form of gillnet by just this fleet of 50 ships. And as conservationists, we're of course encouraging people to say no to single-use straws and no to plastic bags and things like this. But here's 750 tons of marine plastic in the form of gillnets that are abandoned at sea by these boats. And it's factored into the economics of their fishing operations. So effective were these boats that in just 3 years of fishing, deep sea sharks in the North Atlantic fell to 20% of their pre-fishing number. So the European Union kicked these boats out. These boats then went to India, off the coast of India, where they wiped out deep sea sharks. They then went to the Mozambique Channel, where they wiped out deep sea sharks. And boarding the Libico 2 off the coast of Liberia, we discovered that the shark poachers had now come to West Africa, a place where historically there still has been fish and shark. From the cargo manifests seized on board this ship, we knew that every 3 weeks, 18 to 21 days, the Libico 2 was offloading 50 ton of shark liver oil in the port of Dakar in Senegal. And to produce 50 ton of shark liver oil takes the lives of 66,000 deep sea sharks, which means that just this one single ship alone was killing 500,000 sharks every single year. It's incredible because as conservationists, we know the statistic that 73 to 100 million sharks are killed every single year. Here is one single vessel that nobody knew about, operating illegally in the Shadowlands, killing 500,000 sharks. The vessel was arrested by the Liberian Coast Guard. It was detained in the port of Monrovia, and it's now been more than 2 years and the vessel has not been out to sea to fish since, which means that one single action on one of these African IUU fishing patrols has saved the lives of over 1 million sharks to date. And again, that's the kind of success that you can only get with an organization like Sea Shepherd. We then expanded our operations to include the Gambia, Benin, Namibia, Tanzania. Off the coast of Tanzania, we assisted the Tanzanian Authority to board a Taiwanese-owned Malaysian flagged vessel. This vessel, once on board, had 12 Indonesian seafarers who told the Tanzanian police inspectors that if they weren't catching enough shark fins, then they were denied food and water. And if they weren't catching enough fish, then the captain of the boat would routinely threaten them with a firearm, with a gun. The Tanzanian police found in the captain's cabin on board that ship a loaded, unlicensed Beretta firearm. The ship was arrested, it was confiscated, forfeited to the state of Tanzania. The captain, the owner, and the agent representing that vessel, all three of them were sentenced to 20 years imprisonment for the crime of shark finning and for the labor abuses that they partook in. What we've been able to do in the past 4 years working with a number of countries around the African continent is assist the governments of those countries to arrest 54 vessels for illegal fishing and other fisheries crimes. We've established a model that really works. It can be so daunting, the idea of saving the oceans, but thankfully we don't have to save the entirety of the oceans. That's 3/4 of the planet. We have to identify these critical areas of biodiversity, these places where we can really dig in our positions, where we can take a stand and where we can push back poachers who have plundered those places for way too long. That's places like Liberia, places like Gabon, places like Tanzania, the places that we're working in. And what we're now doing is working to expand those national campaigns into regional patrols by signing agreements with neighboring countries to our existing partnerships. And the dream then is if we can have law enforcement agents on board from a number of different countries at the same time, well, then we can move seamlessly between borders and do something that navies can't actually do. We know what we're capable of because we helped shut down illegal fishing in the Antarctic. And if we could do that there, then we can certainly do it in the Gulf of Guinea. And if we can do it in the Gulf of Guinea, then we can do it in the West Africa region. If we can do that, we can do it around the continent of Africa. And if we can do that there, then we can do it in the South Pacific. We can do it in Southeast Asia. We can do it around Latin America. 2 weeks ago, we signed an agreement with Peru's Agency for Natural Protected Areas to work together with Peruvian authorities to help establish Peru's largest marine protected area, which would cover something like 8% of their waters. And so we're hoping with Peru now on board with cooperating and collaborating with Sea Shepherd that other countries in Latin America will follow, and that we can continue together to turn back this tide of destruction. There's an NGO called Global Fishing Watch, and they map out concentrations of fishing activity around the world. And if you look at a map of their operations, what you see is fishing activity lighting up this map, almost like towns and villages or cities in a desert at night if you were flying over something like the outback in Australia. In the area and the places we've been working, Tanzania, Liberia, and Gabon, those lights are dimming. And local small-scale artisanal fishermen in these places are seeing fish coming back for the first time in half a century. What we know is that we're having an effect. We want to continue this business of working together with governments, but to do that, we need the support of people around the world. We're entirely dependent on donations from the public, large and donors, but also the largest amount of fundraising we get is from people who have everyday jobs, who are able to contribute the little bit that they can, especially if they're able to do it on a monthly basis. That's what allows us to budget our campaigns and plan our campaigns going forward. And our ships essentially stay in port until we have the funds to fuel up our ships and get out to sea. It's a pleasure for me to speak to all of you because you've decided to join this presentation because you're divers and you're passionate about diving, because you're genuine ocean lovers. And for me, it's not enough to just love something. You have to also defend and protect and conserve what you love. Sea Shepherd is the only private navy out there doing the job that the world's navies should be doing, which is protecting the world's oceans. And Sea Shepherd appeals to people for a number of different reasons. And regardless of why you're passionate about Sea Shepherd, if it's for the environment, then we are the organization that ensures that marine protected areas are not just paper tigers. These MPAs get established, but then we come in with our ships and we ensure that they're actually protected, that they're not just marine protected areas on paper. If conservation is your passion, we are the ones on the front lines with local governments and national governments around the African continent, stopping these poachers from coming in the first place. If your passion is for animals, if animal rights or animal welfare if that's what really drives you, then these campaigns, working in cooperation with these governments, we're saving more lives than we've ever saved in our over 40 years of campaigns. Again, I remind you that when we were able to assist the Liberian Coast Guard to arrest the Libico II, we were able to save over 1 million sharks. If your passion is social justice, if that's what drives you, and I see that there's an intersectionality between all of these things, then we are assisting small-scale, local, artisanal fishermen whose nets every single night are being run over. Their canoes and pirogues are being run over by industrial fishing operators who prioritize profit over lives. I ask you to join us and support us today. And before I go, I just want to show you a quick little video that highlights our operations around the continent of Africa, showcasing very quickly our 7 operations so that you can see also what I've been talking about, just this past little bit. the Bob Barker off the coast of Gabon, the Sam Simon off the coast of Liberia. And just a week ago, the Bob Barker crew were able to assist the Gabonese authorities to arrest 2 Chinese flag trawlers with over a ton of rays and ray fins on board. So these patrols are happening right now, and that's why I ask you to please support us, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Awesome. So if anybody has any questions for Peter, go ahead and send them through me via chat. I'll do my best to get through all of them, but we have a lot of you here, so I'll kind of pick and choose the best ones or the ones that I think most people want to hear, and we'll go from there. So go ahead and send them on over. The calm before the storm. I'm just waiting. There they are. Peter, have you ever had issues with the Somalia pirates?
We have not had issues with the Somali pirates to date, although piracy is on the increase now in the Gulf of Guinea. And in fact, in Gabon, where we're working right now, there have been a couple of hijackings that have happened and kidnappings that have happened in just the past year. In Benin, where we're working, there have been 3 hijackings that have happened in the past year. And so when we're working in these areas, we are incredibly cautious, and we have our own anti-piracy measures that we take. But we also have armed Coast Guard or Navy on board who protect the ship, and I think we would be a very daunting target to take on. So thankfully, we haven't had that risk to our life. But I think it's important to look at what really started the Somali piracy issue in the Gulf of Aden. And when Siad Barre, the dictator of Somalia, when his regime fell and Somalia descended further into civil war, there was no Coast Guard and no Navy operating off the coast of Somalia. And so dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of foreign trawlers were coming and fishing off the coast of Somalia illegally, taking advantage of the fact that the country was falling apart. Big European companies were even dumping garbage and waste off the coast of Somalia, which was washing up on shore. And what very few people know is that the first 2 vessels that were ever hijacked off the coast of Somalia were 2 Russian trawlers that local fishermen who banded together and called themselves the Somali Coast Guard, essentially a vigilante band who were operating because there was no official Coast Guard operating. Though they went out and they hijacked those 2 ships. So the 2 first vessels hijacked were fishing boats. Then the Somali operations were taken over by bigger criminal syndicates, and then terrorism funding got involved, and everything fell apart, and hijacking cargo vessels became a lot more lucrative. But in the beginning, from the outset, it started because of illegal fishing off Somalia. Piracy has been drastically reduced off the coast of Somalia now. There's, I think last year there were maybe 4 attacks, whereas if you go 5 years back or 10 years back, we're talking about weekly piracy attacks. And that's because of the patrolling presence there of the European Union, of the United States and the United Kingdom and other countries who are keeping the shipping lanes open. But on the other hand, these world navies do not have a directive to do anything about illegal fishing. So although the shipping lanes are open, there's a huge problem with illegal fishing happening right now. And recently, Global Fishing Watch released information saying that there were over 100 trawlers that were operating illegally in Somalia right now. And that's despite the fact that there's a patrolling presence. It's just not part of their directive. So knowing what the international community can do if they band together over a single issue like piracy, which is to shut it down, imagine what we could do if the international community prioritized shutting down illegal fishing. They could absolutely 100% do it. So what we do is we see illegal fishing certainly within a broader maritime security context as well. An area that has piracy will also have illegal fishing, will also have narcotics trafficking, because the assets simply aren't there to patrol. And if you can bring patrolling assets into one of these areas, then you can eradicate illegal fishing, and you can bring economic prosperity to these countries as well as you bring about economic development.
Peter, how many ships are currently in the Sea Shepherd fleet?
So we have 3 vessels that belong to Sea Shepherd Global out of Amsterdam. That's the Ocean Warrior, the Sam Simon, and the Bob Barker. And 6 vessels that operate out of the United States through Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. 2 of those vessels from Sea Shepherd Global side, as I mentioned earlier, are currently on patrol off the coast of West Africa. And we're now going through our COVID policies and procedures to get our ships in the United States out on campaign as soon as possible as well. And that includes resuming Operation Milagro in the Sea of Cortez to defend the critically endangered vaquita porpoise. For the past 6 years, we've been working with Mexican authorities to pull up illegal gill nets in the Sea of Cortez. Over 1,000 gill nets have been seized and removed since that collaboration started. These are nets that are being set by poachers to target an also endangered fish called the totoaba. The totoaba fish is being killed for its bladder, which is being smuggled to China, where it's being sold for about $10,000 a kilogram. But as these gill nets are being set for the totoaba fish, they're also catching the vaquita. And the last figures from sightings that were done last year is that there are less than 20 vaquita remaining. So Sea Shepherd's efforts working together with the Mexican authorities, actually being there in the vaquita refuge, pulling up these nets every single day, releasing any animals caught, is the only reason the vaquita is still around. And hopefully we can continue that campaign as soon as it's safe to do so.
Peter, I got an email question asking if Sea Shepherd Australia intends to get another ship to replace the Steve Irwin, and will there be further campaigns in the Southern Hemisphere?
Yes, we are looking at increasing the size of our fleet, and I can't get into too much detail about that, but certainly one of our goals is to have a vessel that is operating in Oceania, in the South Pacific, that can be based out of Australia and New Zealand. When it comes down to the Southern Oceans, after the arrest of the Bandit 6, another vessel called the STS-50, after about 2 years, started taking up their own poaching operations. This was a Russian-owned outfit. Because we were patrolling off of Tanzania, we actually were involved in a chase of the STS-50 across the Indian Ocean. The vessel was later apprehended once again by the Indonesian Navy. The captain was arrested, the vessel was confiscated, and it's now being remade into a training vessel. But certainly if we get any indicator that the poaching of Patagonian and Antarctic toothfish will come up again in the Southern Ocean, then we would certainly revisit the Southern Ocean. As of last year, there's no more whaling in the Southern Ocean whatsoever. The Japanese whaling fleet has abandoned the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary, and for the first time ever, the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary is a sanctuary not just in name, but in practice as well. And that is really thanks to 10 years of Sea Shepherd campaigns, which saved over 6,000 whales, but also set a media agenda, that set a political agenda that got Australia and New Zealand to take the government of Japan to court. And had it not been for those actions, I'm confident the Japanese whaling fleet would still be going down to the Southern Ocean. So again, we know what we're capable of. We eliminated whaling in the Southern Ocean. We eliminated illegal fishing in the Southern Ocean. But I know Captain Paul Watson taught me many, many years ago that as conservationists, all of our victories are temporary, but our defeats are permanent. And so we have to always be watchful. It's assisting law enforcement agents to stop poaching. It's no different than law enforcement work in any other sphere. You can clean up drug dealing in an area, right? But as soon as the police agencies leave, in time, it doesn't necessarily happen overnight. It doesn't necessarily happen in a month, but over time, the criminal activity will resume unless you deal with the cause of those crimes. And so that's why we have to continue operating the areas we're operating. And so, for example, in Liberia, where we've done 5 campaigns, every campaign has resulted in less arrests than the campaign previous. And that means that we're having results because we are deterring poaching.
Peter, when we had Paul, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, he said that the Chinese were backing out of the Galapagos. Do you have any update on that situation?
Well, there was a lot of media attention about 2-3 weeks ago about 260 largely Chinese flagged vessels, part of the Chinese, what's known as the Chinese distant water fishing fleet, operating off of the Galapagos Islands. Some of the media reports gave the impression that they were actually fishing in the Galapagos Marine Reserve, which they were not. But many of these, at least that we know of, but many of these vessels were turning off their automatic transponders, and they would do what we refer to as going dark. So it's hard to know what they were doing. Although I know the Ecuadorian Navy was putting all of their resources into patrolling the border of the Galapagos Marine Reserve and preventing these vessels from coming in. But it does speak to the larger illegal fishing problematic, right? As fish populations have fallen off of Southeast Asia and off the coast of China, as fish populations have fallen off the coast of Europe, where the European Union fishing fleet has a capacity that's 2.5 times what they could fish in European waters. These foreign fleets are going all around the world to fish ever diminishing fish populations, and that includes off the coast of West Africa, which is why the vessels that are being arrested are largely Chinese owned, but also there are some European owned vessels as well. Because of the media attention that the presence of these vessels had off of Galapagos, the Chinese government actually had them withdraw and put aside 2 different areas. These were largely squid boats, 2 areas off the Galapagos Islands where the Chinese Fisheries Authority themselves said that the Chinese vessels couldn't fish for the next 3 months, so they put in their own ban. It's been a little bit controversial because based on the migratory patterns of the squid probably wouldn't be in that area this time of year anyway. But it does show that the Chinese authorities are starting to take public pressure a bit more seriously. For a long time, they just haven't really cared. Whereas earlier this year, the Chinese government started to establish their own blacklist of vessels, where if they come across vessels that are under the Chinese flag fishing illegally, then the Chinese government is saying they're going to actually prosecute them and investigate them. So that remains to be seen. And I think we can have some really important case studies coming out of what we're doing off the coast of West Africa, where Chinese flag vessels are being arrested. But what's really crazy about what was happening off the coast of the Galapagos is, one, these vessels were probably operating illegally unless other evidence suggests it. And they were operating outside the Galapagos Marine Reserve. And the Ecuadorian government, because it was outside national jurisdiction, they were in what is known as the high seas. They were largely had their hands tied as to what they could do about it. And so before COVID-19 happened, there was a large effort internationally to actually establish a United Nations treaty on the high seas. About 40% of the world's oceans fall under any type of national jurisdiction. That's what we call the high seas, which is the real Wild West, where it's really up to the flag state of the fishing ship to enforce the laws. So if they're North Korean flag vessels fishing in the high seas, for example, it's up to Pyongyang to bring them into line. And of course, that would be very unlikely. So we need the Chinese government to bring the Chinese flag vessels in line. Alternatively, we need this United Nations treaty on the high seas. Those discussions are ongoing, and I think we'll see that. And what's going to be really important for that treaty is how it allows governments to establish marine protected areas in areas outside of national jurisdiction. At the moment, scientists argue that 30% of the world's oceans should be set aside as marine protected areas. Less than 3% are, and less than 1% are no-take zones where you're not allowed to fish at all. And so we're a long way to go to reach 30% of the world's oceans by 2030, which is a United Nations goal. And establishing marine protected areas in the high seas is a big part of it. So I think if we could get the Chinese government to rein the Chinese distant water fishing fleet in, and they are more sensitive now to public scrutiny, while also increasing the Galapagos Marine Reserve to cover even areas in the high seas, and there could be mechanisms to do that in the future, then I think that would be the way to curtail it in the future. But otherwise, it can be very frustrating. We talk a lot about illegal fishing, but a big problem is the legal fishing industry and how unregulated it can be, especially in the high seas.
Peter, have you heard of any illegal fishing operations in Guadalupe, Mexico? The marine park just closed relatively recently to help keep tourists out, and we're a little bit concerned about what's going on over there because there's no eyes.
Well, Guadalupe Island, for those of you who don't know, is off the coast of Mexico. We've been assisting researchers and scientists from the Mexican government to do studies there on the Cuvier's beaked whale. It's one of the rarest beaked whales in the world. It's a unique, really unique marine mammal. It dives to 6 times the depth that sperm whales dive to, it's 6 times the height of the Empire State Building, which is deeper than sperm whales dive to. Very little is known about them. They're very vulnerable to sonar and seismic testing. And so we've been assisting the scientists there by bringing our vessel, the Martin Sheen, as a floating platform for research so that they can propose stronger protective measures. But having the vessel there is also allowing eyes on the water as well, and we can then provide information to rangers as to if there is any fishing activity. And we are planning to return to Guadalupe Island again as soon as it's safe to do so. What Global Fishing Watch and other groups is saying is that there's a decrease of about 10% of the global fishing pressure around the world. There has been a drop-off because of COVID-19. But there's also a worry that we may see an increase in poaching because of a decrease in controls. So some governments have stopped doing at-sea patrols because of concerns for safety of their personnel. And fisheries observer programs in the Pacific, but in other parts of the world too, in the Indian Ocean, have been suspended. And for those of you who don't know, fisheries observers are essentially ship riders who are also on the fishing boat as an independent observer to ensure that the fishing boat is not violating the law. Because of COVID, these fishing companies have been able to get these regional fisheries management organizations to agree to suspending the observer programs, which then requires us to rely entirely on the honesty of the captains of these fishing boats to report what they're doing. And that's just not something that anybody is really comfortable doing. But it's short, that was a bit of a long answer, but the short answer is that we don't know about Guadalupe, which is the reason why we're trying to get there as soon as we can. And hopefully we can release more information on that in the coming weeks and months.
Peter, we screened the film Watson a couple weeks ago, and there was a scene in the film where you got your boat between a fishing boat and another boat that was trying to refuel it and refused to move. I'd love to know what the outcome of that was.
Right. So about how long ago was that now? 8 years ago, during one of our Antarctic whale defense campaigns, we were able to find the Japanese whaling fleet earlier than we'd ever found them before. And we'd also found their refueling tanker. Because the whaling fleet would spend 3.5 to 4 months in the Southern Ocean, they would need to refuel twice during the course of that. And because they were working so remotely and slaughtering these whales, they would charter a bunkering barge, essentially a big tanker, to refuel them. But we found the refueling tanker early on as well. So the thinking was that if we could block the Japanese whaling fleet from refueling, then we would force them to close their whaling season early, and we would force them to have to go back to port because they wouldn't have enough fuel to continue. After about 3 weeks after we'd found the whaling fleet, the Nishin Maru, this 8,000-ton factory whaling ship that I mentioned earlier in my talk, this ship that I'd seen when I was 14 years old, met up with the Sun Loral, the refueling tanker, to refuel. My crew and I had to essentially double park the tanker, for lack of a better word. The idea was that if we were flush alongside the refueling tanker, then we would take up the berth that the 8,000-ton factory ship would need to take. And my crew and I were willing to stand there and stay there for as long as it took. And similar to the story of the Thunder and the commitment of the crew, I did tell the crew, all 30 of them, 35 of them I think it was then, that we were going to take on this action, that we were going to essentially get in between a 5,000-ton tanker and an 8,000-ton factory whaling ship, and we were going to refuse to move and see what would happen. And there was another opportunity for the crew to disembark onto another Sea Shepherd vessel that was on the scene, and every single one of my crew was willing to stand their ground and get between that tanker and that refueling ship. The Nishin Maru, this 5-story tall vessel, tried to push us out of the way. I remember standing on the bridge of the Bob Barker at the helm when my second officer, Una, who is very calm and collected, and she was at the pitch control, it's what controls our speed. She was standing to my starboard side, to starboard of me. I heard her say the words "uh-oh," and I looked to my right, and I saw the anchor of the Nishan Maru, like a big black wrecking ball, 5 feet outside the window, and I could then hear metal antenna and metal masts above the wheelhouse start to crumble and bend as the Nishan Maru tried to push us out of the way. But when they saw that we refused to move, they ultimately backed down. And when we put them in a position where they would have to either back down or sink us, they did back down. They left the Southern Ocean. This was a confrontation that spanned 5 days, but when they realized they couldn't refuel, they left. That year, the Japanese whaling fleet took 103 whales from their bogus self-allocated quota out of their target 1,035, which means that they only reached 10% of their quota, which meant 932 whales saved, which was a tremendous victory.
Awesome.
Peter, a lot of people are asking, besides donations, I know a lot of people have already donated since being involved in your seminar here. What else could we do to help your efforts?
Well, there's a number of ways to get involved, and I see that my dear friend and I would say adoptive Australian father, Philip Wallen, has chimed in here or logged in here. Philip Wallen is a great animal advocate and philanthropist who supports over 500 projects around the world, including Sea Shepherd. He was actually in the Gambia with me earlier this year when we assisted the Gambia Navy to arrest a vessel for having 54 shark fins on board. And just a few weeks ago, he was willing to donate or match up to $100,000 that anybody donated. We actually reached that goal. People around the world who contributed, and Philip generously with his wife Trix matched that. One way, of course, is to donate. That's entirely how we are able to fund our operations and our campaigns. And if you are able to donate, and I don't feel I can ask for that because of COVID-19, and I know people's economic challenges are real and large, but when you can and if you can, I promise that we will translate your generous donation into lives saved on the high seas. Over 80% of our crew are volunteers from around the world. You can go onto our website, seashepherdglobal.org or seashepherd.org if you're in the US. If you're in Australia, seashepherd.org.au. And you can fill in an application to join as crew. And if you're as lucky as I was at the age of 18, and then hopefully your life can be changed forever as you get involved in a direct action sense. But that's not possible for everybody either, especially here in the United States where people don't get many holidays, and maybe you're not able to leave your job or leave your family. And for those people, you can volunteer onshore, and we have onshore chapters around the world who do an unbelievable amount of work in raising funds to get our ships to sea. So if you can't donate money, maybe you can donate time. Our onshore volunteers are at events when it's safe to do so. They're at concerts, they do outreach, they speak to people, they get the word out there, and they're really force amplifiers, force multipliers for the crew at sea. And maybe if you're uncertain about whether you can commit to being at sea, maybe being an onshore volunteer is a way to kind of first get involved and see if Sea Shepherd is a fit for you. But our onshore volunteers really are the lifeblood of the organization, and we could not do anything if it wasn't for their tireless work, shaking cans and talking to people on the street every single day. And if you don't have the time or the money to do any of those things, then get the word out there and speak to people about the state of the oceans and get people to realize what I think is the biggest flaw we have as people is thinking that we're somehow separate from the natural world instead of being integrally connected to it and being a part of a greater ecosystem, and that we share this planet with millions of other earthlings, and we need to take our ethical, our moral responsibility to care for them and to care for ourselves in the process.
That's great, Peter. I want to thank you so much for your time this evening and for your enlightening words. I, for one, as someone who makes my living in the oceans of the world, thank you and Sea Shepherd for all that you guys do. I know that it's not easy what you guys do, and you make you get things done that others are afraid to try, and I think that's incredibly admirable. And it's one of the reasons we support Sea Shepherd so much and want to share your mission and your actions with our clientele and people that that we know. We've got over 102 people on this call right now, which shows the passion of this group. Yes, big Yahoo for all you guys for being here. And
if everybody donates $1 million, we're set.
and I don't want to keep you too much longer, Peter, but I really want to thank you so much for your time and all that you guys do, and know that we're here anytime you need us. If there's anything we can do with my two companies to help you guys out, more than what we do constant fundraising for you guys, and work very closely with the Denver branch of Sea Shepherd, which, by the way, there is a Denver branch of Sea Shepherd, and we do quite a few events with them annually. I would encourage everybody again to donate if you can, what you can, to seashepherd.org, or is it seashepherdglobal.org also?
It's whatever's convenient for you where you are based in the world.
Whatever shepherd dot whatever. But again, and I want to thank everybody for your interest in the oceans and your passion for the oceans, for being a part of this call this evening. It's amazing that this is the largest one of these Zoom meetings we've had so far, and I'm excited that it was about an effort like Sea Shepherd is doing around the world. So thank you all for being here. Big applause to all of you. And just a commercial note, we have an event coming up September 12th to the 18th called ScubaCon. Usually it's something that we do as an event here in our store. We've actually had Paul Watson as part of it. Was it 3 years ago? I think Paul was here to be a part of our event. Obviously, we can't do that this year because of the concerns about large crowd gatherings. So we're going to do a virtual event, and we're going to have some of our suppliers from around the world do virtual seminars throughout that week. We've got 3 or 4 scheduled each day, and people from all parts of the world, including Danny Charlton, who's here with us from Lembeh Resort and Critters at Lembeh in Indonesia, will be one of our speakers. And at each one of these 45-minute seminars, we'll be giving away a trip to that destination at the end of the seminar to anyone that attends. So for every seminar that you attend, you'll get an opportunity to win a great trip to one of these great destinations. And then at the end of the week, we will have a grand prize drawing where we're giving away more prizes for anybody that registered for any of the seminars during the week, which again is September 12th to the 18th. We'll give away some grand prizes at the end of the week at a gear sale that we're having on the 19th and the 20th. So if you need more information on that, you can email us. You should all have our email address, info@weaversdive.com or info@dreamweavertravel.com, or you can check out our website at one of those 2 URLs, weaversdive.com or dreamweavertravel.com. And we hope to see a bunch of you there to support our suppliers around the world that are all struggling right now to keep their employees employed and to keep doing the good work that they're doing. Most of these companies have their own marine protected campaigns that they're working on. So, and without the support of us as tourists right now, they're having to really struggle to be able to maintain these programs. So I would encourage you to tune in, listen to what they have to say, and support them if you can. Once we can start traveling again, we're going to start going back to these places. And quite frankly, I can't wait. My last trip, Peter, was to Antarctica.
Wow.
In February, which I didn't dive because it's freaking cold there. But I
Just did.
which was my 7th continent, and I'm super excited about that. But my last dive trip was to Indonesia, Lembeh Resort in January. So I'm pretty anxious to get back in the water and start diving. So once again, thank you everyone for participating, and Peter, especially you, thank you so much for being here, and thank you again for all the good work you do. And we'd love to host you in Colorado again anytime you want to come. And anytime you want to join us on a trip, you're welcome too. And bring your significant other. We'd love to have you join us on one of our trips.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Steve. For those of you who are globally based, if you don't know where this great state of Colorado is on a map, it is landlocked. And there's the Rocky Mountain chain that does separate Colorado from the Pacific Ocean. And yet Colorado has the high, and correct me if I'm wrong, has the highest concentration of divers of any state in the United States. Am I right with that?
Per capita, yes.
Per capita. And so I was able to go there and speak at the dive shop 7 years ago, and the passion that you have for the oceans was contagious, and it really gave me energy for my work. And that's why when I got the invitation to speak, it was a no-brainer for me, because I really do feel connected with you all in Colorado. So as soon as it's safe to cross the mountains from Los Angeles, California, if you want us Californians to come with our COVID-19 problems to Colorado, I'll certainly be there. And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. And thank you everybody for joining us from all around the world. It's great to see so many familiar faces, and keep safe. And hopefully I'll see you at sea or in person at an event somewhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Peter, and thank you all. Have a good evening.